Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We're excited to have you here today. This is part of the Division for Learning Disabilities Lunch and Learn series, and we're excited to have Dr. David Bateman joining us today. David is a nationally recognized expert on special ed law. He's also a part of the executive committee on the Division for Learning Disabilities, and so we're excited to have him speaking with us today about progress monitoring, benchmarking for students, and starting to collect data, thinking about the extended school year determinations that we want to make for students. This session is being recorded. You'll get a link to the recording after the session tomorrow, and then it'll also be shared with any registered attendees that were not able to join us today. And then a month from now, we will post it on the YouTube page for anyone to enjoy. So if you want to share it with colleagues and that sort of thing, you can find it on the YouTube page. This is a webinar, and so your chat messages are not visible to everyone attending. If you want to send in a question for David to answer, please use the Q&A feature. At the bottom of the Zoom screen, you'll see where it says Q&A. Click that, and we will see those messages and answer them as we have time at the end. Thank you all for joining us, and with that, I'll turn it over to David.
Thank you. Thank you, John. I really appreciate it. And this is really applaud all of you for being here today. Hi, I'm David Bateman, and today we're going to dig into some of the most important components of legally compliant and instructionally meaningful special education. Progress monitoring, winter benchmark, and now that it's December, getting ready for summer programming. So there's something we often need to pay attention to. This is a practical session. My goal is to give you clear, usable strategies you can bring back to your teams right away. What we're talking about today is not theoretical. This is the work that helps keep IEPs defensible, keeps students progressing, and keeps districts out of trouble. Winter is a critical point in the school year. By December, January, we have enough instructional time to see real patterns. We see whether there's growth, whether there's stagnation or regression. And this makes the perfect time to double check the quality of our progress monitoring, tighten up our data systems, and prepare for ESY discussions that will be occurring in the spring. We'll walk through each process today and make sure you have tools about this one. So here's my contact information. Please feel to reach out after this session. I'm always happy to support districts, directors, coordinators, or teachers' teams with questions about progress monitoring, IEP development, ESY decisions, compliance issues of late, witness testimony, those kinds of things. Expert witness. So I also update about legal developments and special education practices on my blog, Sped Law Blog. So if you want continuing updates, that's an easy way to follow. Sped Law Blog is it's free, and we will never try to sell you anything as a part of this. The update we did on Saturday, I do it with Michelle. The update we did on Saturday related to the 50th anniversary of the signing of Public Law 94-142, just to remind people where we are with this. All right. So get ready. And enjoy this. Yes, this is all live this in the afternoon for me. So here we go. All right. All right. Whoops. Come on. It's not switching. All right. Okay. So purpose. All right. It's about strengthening progress monitoring practices because everything in the IEP sits on top of that data. If the data are weak, inconsistent, or unclear, the whole IEP will fall apart. And we're going to look at three major buckets of this. And I want to spend some time really looking at these and make sure we're identifying them. First, progress monitoring, what it must include and how teams often go wrong. Second, winter benchmarking, how to use mid-year data to verify whether students are actually on track to meet annual goals. And third, ESY data gathering, how to collect the evidence needed so that ESY decisions are not just guesses, not opinions, but defensible. Student-specific determinations based on documented facts. By the end of the session, you'll have a framework. You'll have a framework that'll have decision rules and hopefully templates that we can start talking about that you can use immediately. All right. All right. So let's why does this matter? And this emphasize this. Okay. And I mean this with all seriousness. Is let's be clear. Progress monitoring is not optional. It really isn't. IDEA requires that districts measure progress towards IEP goals and report progress to parents. That's federal law, and that's not changing. So keep that in mind. The winter benchmark window gives us something incredibly valuable. an objective checkpoint. It's a clear point where we can see and validate whether the student is making the kind of progress we expect when the team wrote the IEP. We got to look at these things. And ESY, it may seem strange, but we're talking about extended school year programming, but you need to make these determinations and get the data for this now. This is valuable. Too many teams make ESY decisions based on feel, on opinions, on what the parents ask for, or what the school usually does. Keep that in mind. None of that is lawful. ESY must be data driven, and not just any data. Specific data documenting regression, documenting recruitment, documenting critical skills, and rate of progress. This is all valuable part of this one. Okay. So if you want to make defensible ESY decisions, it starts now, mid-year, not 2 weeks before the annual review. And I can't emphasize that enough. This is a valuable part of what we're doing here. All right. So what progress monitoring must do? All right. Let's keep in mind. When we talk about progress monitoring, we're not talking about anecdotal comments. I love anecdotal comments. They are great. They really help what's going on. Like as anecdotal comments I've seen just this week, and it's a short week, so we're only on Tuesday, but I've seen like he's doing better or she seems more confident. And those were on reading goals, which is great. I'm glad she's more confident, but that doesn't tell me anything whatsoever about how the child is doing on reading. So I'm applaud this. So we have to think about this one. But progress monitoring must first be directly aligned to the IEP goals. Just keep that in mind. Second, it must use a valid, reliable method, one that we can use over and over again. So we can do this on a regular basis. Third, be collected on a predictable schedule. I'm working with a number of districts right now. We have established that Wednesday afternoon is the time to do this because a lot of kids miss Mondays, a lot of kids miss Fridays. And so we're just doing Wednesday afternoons as our collection of data. And so it's a regular schedule and you can quantify that. Next, be objective and be quantifiable. You need to be able to graph the little suckers and be able to articulate what's going on as part of this one. Okay. And this is the other point. This is really what's important about this one is it needs to be documented clearly that a third party can follow it. Why is that important? You need to be able to share it with principals. You need to be able to share it with parents. You need to be able to share it with your legal counsel. You need to be able to share it with others and have them be able to say yes or no. Is the child making progress based on how you graph this? If you don't have data that you can clearly articulate and share with when you label the XY axis and you put it in front of them and they can say yes or no, whether the child is going up, you need to do a better job of graphing your data. If the system isn't built correctly, progress monitoring let me start that. If a system is built correctly, progress monitoring should inform instruction. It's not a compliance test. It's an instructional feedback loop. We've got to think about it that way. When the data move, instruction adjusts. If the data doesn't move, instruction must adjust. So keep this in mind. So keep this in mind as we address this, right? Let's talk about common pitfalls. And this is where I live because I do a lot of witness preparation for due process hearings. And these are the things that I'm seeing. And these are things that I've seen just in the past 6 weeks. So just entertain yourself because this is highly current stuff. But be concerned that this is something you're seeing within your district. Okay. I see the same errors again and again when reviewing IEPs from across the country. And there's things like this one. First one, inconsistent data collection. There are multiple weeks with no data. WEEK, not WEAK, weeks without any data. No system in place or data collected only right before the meeting. Okay, so inconsistent data or just one data point per marking period. Go ahead and graph that. Second, anecdotal descriptions only. Data like he's improving with no numbers whatsoever attached. So we have no sense, yes or no, whether the child is actually improving on what's going on. Subjective language. Phrases such when he feels like it, or when motivated, or with encouragement. These are meaningless for compliance or are also meaningless for instruction. Keep that in mind. Next, no instructional response documented. The student is not progressing, but the record shows no changes in SDI. And when students are not progressing, you need to change something. Okay. And last, misalignment with SDI. I'm going to spend a lot of time in other sessions and things that I'm going to be doing at CEC conference in Utah talking about SDI, that the data don't match either the goal or the instruction provided. So keep this in mind. Okay. Districts lose due process hearings or we settle these. Why put a teacher on the stand if you have crappy data? Okay. We settle this and we have to come up with better ways of articulating what's going on. These are absolutely preventable problems. So keep this in mind as we're talking about. So what are the components? Now that you understand the pitfalls, well, let's talk about the components of high quality progress monitoring data. Okay? High quality progress monitoring has five basic essential components. Right? Five basic essential components. First, a clear, very clear, defensible baseline. The baseline must be numeric and directly tied to the goal. Clear, very clear is about this one. Second, we need to make sure that we have a measurable goal. A measurable goal. I can say it like I have marbles in my mouth, but it's measurable goal. If the goal isn't measurable, progress monitoring collapses. Keep that in mind as we address this. Third, frequent probes. And when I say frequent probes, not quarterly, weekly or every other week for most academic goals. I am working with an organization right now. It's an online tele organization where they're taking data every single time they interact with the child, which is amazing because I'm helping them do witness preparation. It's wonderful. SLPs do this, but I'm seeing this increasingly with teachers. Now, is that a lot of data? Yes, but it's amazing what we can see and use that for changes of what's going on. Fourth, visual displays. I'm a huge fan of interocular analysis. I need to eyeball the little suckers. Okay. Graphs tell you what your eyes can't see in raw numbers. I want to be able to see what the graph says. This is how you track the trend line and the aim line. So keep that in mind. And then last, this is what is all too often. Many districts may have the first three or four, but what they're missing is the last one. As a decision rule, teams should preset criteria for when to adjust the instruction. Don't just teach, but come up with an understanding of what to do if the child is not making progress. When these components exist, the student benefits and the district is protected. So keep this in mind. So tools. So what teams need actual tools, not just ideas. Probes that are consistent, probes that are quick, and probes that are tied to the goal and skills. Next, graph templates for visualizing growth. We need to come up with some real good graph templates about what we mean by growth for these kids. Okay? Accommodation logs showing that supports were provided and with what frequency. This is vital for manifestation determination reviews. This is vital for compliance checks. This is vital for when districts are monitored by the state. So make sure you have accommodation logs of what's being done for these. And it's not just the special ed teachers who do this, but also the gen ed teachers are providing the accommodations. Make sure that they understand what their roles are part of this. And ESY evidence logs to document regression, to document recoupment, and to document the critical skills that are necessary for that child as a part of this one. And last, benchmark comparison sheets, tying winter benchmark data to the IEP goals. So this is what we need to think about this one. So if you want consistency across classrooms and you want consistency across schools, you need to standardize the tools. Don't just yes, teachers probably come up with all sorts of ideas of what to do, but you need to think about how we can standardize this so that we can be effective about this. All right. So let's move forward. Why winter benchmarking matters. Okay? Winter benchmarks, and I mean this, it's gifting time. Winter benchmarks are the most overlooked gift we get each school year. And I mean this. Okay? Because winter data, what does winter data do? It validates whether instruction is working. It truly does. Validates what we're doing. Second, it shows the student's rate of growth or progress. That is what's vital as a part of this one. Third, it identifies gaps or red flags when that are not obvious earlier. I mean, we probably had some sense in September and early October that the kid wasn't making progress. By November, and now that we're well ensconced into December, is that we should be able to know what's going on about this one. But this is what's vital. It gives the clearest early evidence for ESY eligibility. By mid-year, the student has had enough exposure to the STI for us to see whether the goals were appropriate and whether the instruction is being producing meaningful progress for these kids. So we need to think about this one. This is a gift. Think about it as a gift and think about it that appropriately, right? So connecting benchmark to IEP goals. This is where a lot of districts stumble. This is where a lot of districts stumble. Winter best benchmarking must be connected to the IEP, not treated as a separate system. And I mean this with all seriousness. Ask these four questions. Ask these four questions. First, and this is what, think about this one. First, is the student on track? Just is the student making progress? This gets back to what I was saying earlier. We have some demarcation about yes or no, whether the student is reaching their goals. Second, is the SDI sufficient to support continued progress? Is a student first making progress? Yeah, that's great. But do we think that they're going to continue to make progress with this? Ask that question. Third, is the rate of progress indicate adequate growth? All right. We have some expectations when we write these IEPs that the student is going to make progress by the end of the year. Is the student going to make that progress? And fourth, do the IEP goals need revisions based on the winter data? If the benchmark says that the student is far off the aim line, the team must not act now. Don't act in April. Now is the time. And I mean this with all seriousness. So ask these very four specific questions, and you can do a better job of articulating what's going on and be able to understand and be able to change what's going on with that student and not wait till a later date about this one. All right. So let's talk about the biggest word I'm going to use for this whole presentation. Ready? Triangulation. Okay. Triangulation. Okay. Make sure that you never base any of your decisions on one data point. Triangulation means pulling together three sources. All right. Think about this one. Yeah. I'm actually using the word triangulation. I'm pretty proud of myself. All right. Progress monitoring probes, short cycle data. What are we doing as a part of these regular progress monitoring probes for these kids? What kind of data are we getting that's helping us as a part of this one? Second, benchmark scores, standardized or curriculum-based checkpoints that are helping us understand what's going on. And third, classroom performance, classwork, quizzes, and functional performance and what's going on. All three sources need to align. When we do this, we have a defensible picture of the student's needs. When they don't align, there's a warning flag that's something that requires investigation. Something needs to change. So we need to do better as a part of this one. So keep this in mind as we talk about this one. So I want to make sure that we are going to use December, not just as we can't wait till the holidays, but as a way to actually gather the data that helps us move forward. All right. So using this data, let's talk about ESY. Okay. And ESY is truly, and I mean this with all seriousness, is one of the most misunderstood requirements under IDEA. It is not a program. It is an eligibility determination driven by specific criteria. I'm going to say that again, if I can remember this one. It is not a program. It is an eligibility determination driven by specific criteria. Proud of myself that I remembered that, okay? But what you have to do is teams need to consider in order for ESY redetermination, first, the regression and recoupment. What the student loses during breaks and how long it takes to recover. Right? What your job is to use the word recoupment in a normal holiday conversation. Good luck there. Critical skills. Skills so essential that loss will harm access or progress. Third, emerging skills. Fragile skills that are just developing and could disappear without support. Fourth, severity of disability. How the disability impacts the student's ability to maintain progress. And fifth, rate of progress. Slow progress towards essential goals may indicate need. Every one of these requires evidence, not just assumptions. So keep this in mind as we address this one. All right. Now is the time to start thinking about ESY. But first, let's make sure we understand what ESY is not so that you can articulate this with your teams. Okay. What ESY is not. Okay. Because let's clear up what ESY, not common misconceptions, because there are some real problems in practice. First, ESY is not summer school. It is not a continuation of the general education summer programming. It is not summer school. A lot of parents don't understand this. Second, ESY is not automatic. Do not get ESY simply because they are in special education. Keep that in mind. Third, ESY is also not preference based. Parents cannot choose ESY. Teams, get this, teams must determine need. Keep that in mind. Parents are an active member of the team, but they are the one out the sole determination about whether the child can get us. And last one, it's not predetermined. Districts cannot decide in advance who will or won't be eligible. There's a strong, I see this in a lot of litigation of late. There's districts who just basically say students with learning disabilities are not eligible for ESY. Nope, that's not legal. You don't say that and don't do that. Make the determinations appropriately. ESY is individualized. It is a service. It is not a place and must directed to address the areas of the student's needs. All right. So what data do we need for this? All right. Data needed for ESY? Okay. The best ESY decisions happen when teams have a full year of data. Good luck on that. All right. I'm well aware that that's a great thing to have, but most districts don't have that. Specifically, they need baseline data from the start of a goal cycle. Second, winter benchmarks to determine mid-year growth. Hey, that gift that I told you about a few minutes ago. Regular progress monitoring that shows trends. Regression data from breaks, especially winter break. Hey, there's a reason we're doing this in December and talking about this right now. You need to make sure that your teams and your teachers are taking data this month so that when you come back after the winter break, that you can clearly articulate yes or no whether the student regressed and how long it takes them to recoup this stuff. This is valuable data. You don't get long breaks like this. Take advantage of this one. Okay. Recruitment data and evidence of fidelity of STI. Because ESY eligibility, keep this in mind, ESY eligibility can't be judged accurately if the student didn't receive the STI as written. This is why teams must gather ESY data now, not in April or May. This is why we're talking about this now. There's a natural cycle to what we're doing. Do it now, all right? So let's talk about, all right? ESY evidence logged examples, keep this in mind. Give this, okay? You need to capture the specific skill. You need to capture the date of a probe. You need to absolutely score the students in, observational notes, the impact on the educational access. These logs should allow a team to track regression and recruitment with precision. In due process cases, this type of documentation carries significant weight. So due process is something I'm heavily involved in. Not testifying in a case until Monday. So I'm on break now. So it's kind of cool. But it's interesting about this is we have to think about this one. You have to have this kind of data log as a part of this to make a determination, yes or no, about what's going on. Okay. The only way to organize data is to have, the only way to really organize this and have this is to have reliable ESY data is to start organizing now. So make sure that the teams have consistent templates across staff. I'm speaking to the special ed directors, but we need to think about make sure teachers, all the teachers with students with learning disabilities are talking about this one, that we have at least weekly probes that feed directly into graphs, that you can continue to graph on a weekly basis as a part of this one. Then, wait, there's more. Monthly summaries at the end of each month. So we have some sense, yes or no, about whether the student is making progress and spot trends. And then benchmark comparisons to validate accuracy. Well-organized data protects districts and supports strong instructional adjustments. So what you have to think about is organizing the data by having consistent templates, weekly probes, monthly summaries. Not just end of marking period summaries, but monthly summaries is about this one. Keep this in mind. All right. So what I said earlier, that a lot of districts are lacking this is what I'm saying. It's decision rules. Decision rules eliminate subjectivity. They tell the team when to act. Common rules would include, all right, for instance, four data points below the line. Instructional changes needed now. 6 to 8 weeks of no growth. Okay. If you got a trend line that is basically there is no trend, it's just flat. What you have immediate review of the STI, or you have 4 or more weeks of regression after a break. Consider ESY. Okay? Or rate of growth is less than 75% of what is expected, teams must intervene. Okay? When we write these things, we write them for the future. But we need to take advantage of the opportunity to engage with the data that we're reviewing as a part of this one. When you use these kind of decision rules consistently, the process becomes equitable and defensible. You can say, that's how we made the determinations. So some data review questions. Okay? What is the student's rate of progress? Right? When reviewing progress, make sure you understand this. Is the instruction being delivered with fidelity? I can't emphasize that enough. Because what I'm involved in a rash of cases involving manifestation determination reviews. And that is one of the very first questions we ask. Are we implementing the IEP with fidelity? You need to make sure that this is actually happening. Okay? Is the gap between the student and the grade level peers closing or widening? I would really like to have it all be closing. I realize that that's a tough thing, but that's what we need to strive for. Does the instruction match the need? I am seeing teachers use the next page in the textbook, the next program in Ames Web, whether the student needs this or not. We need to make sure that there's a match to the instruction between what the student needs and what we're providing for them. And then adjust the services now, not later. What we have to think about is forcing the teams to use the data rather than relying on impression. All right. So, what do we need by this? And just those of you who aren't aware of me, I do due process hearings. I do expert witness testimony. I've been involved in over 1,089 due process hearings. So keep this in mind. So what do we need by defensible documentation? Right? In hearings, the legal standard is simple. This makes sure you understand it. If it isn't documented, it didn't happen. Keep that in mind. If it isn't documented, it didn't happen. You may have great memory. May have great verbal skills, kind of like my kids. But you have to think about this one. If it's not documented, it didn't happen. All right. So defensible documentation requires a clear connection between the goal, connection between the instruction, and a clear connection between the instruction and the data that we are seeking as a part of this one. Next, defensible documentation also requires regular data entries, at least weekly or more. Okay? I love witness preparation with SLPs, and increasingly that new organization I told you about. Okay? Clear explanations for changes in instruction, why changes were made as a part of this one. Benchmark comparisons are written into the IEP progress reporting. So we have some things. And ASY specific evidence. When documentation is clean, when documentation is clear, when documentation is consistent, the district can show that decisions were thoughtful and data driven. And that's what we need to pay attention to as a part of this one. Right? So let's talk about this one. Right? Some quick tools. These tools support everything. So keep this in mind. Now, I'm not going to stand in front of you and say there are certain programs out there. I'm not going to do that. Right? There are some programs that are clearly better than others, but what you have to think about, what do these tools do? These tools support everything we've discussed today so far, and you should be using them. You need a progress monitoring tracker. You need a benchmark template. You need an ESY log. You need an SDI checklist, and you need a goal alignment form as a part of this one. Standardize these tools. Any tool, and I've worked on this, but any district that has standardized these tools dramatically improves compliance, makes compliance a breeze. In fact, it's fun to watch people from the state come in and gawk at what we have. And then we also see instructional quality improve dramatically over the year. I've done this with a number of districts where we have standardized all these tools. It is wonderful, and we need to keep this in mind as we talk about this one. Okay, so what we have to think about, all right? So keep this in mind as we address this one. All right. So key takeaways. Okay. I wanted, and this is going to give us some chance to take some quick questions. All right. But let me just make sure you understand. Progress monitoring drives instruction. Without it, we are guessing, we are not teaching. Keep that in mind. Progress monitoring drives instruction. Second, benchmarks guide decision. Winter data tells us whether the IEP is working. That's what we need to pay attention to. Winter data helps us whether the IEP is working or not. Third, ESY absolutely must be data driven. Opinions do not win hearings. Documentation does. So keep that in mind as you're listening. And last, Documentation matters. I said this earlier. If you don't have documentation, it doesn't exist. So consistent, clear, and aligned documentation protects kids and protects districts. It also relieves the stress teachers have as a part of their roles and responsibilities. Because one of the things we're seeing is that teachers are leaving the profession due to stress. So keep in mind as we address this. Okay. So keep this in mind as we address this. All right. And I'm gonna take get to questions in a second. But thanks for joining today and talk about this one. I want to highlight. And so we're going to take questions, but highlight that there's another lunch and learn at the next month on January 6th. Dr. Paul Riccomini from Penn State is going to be talking about mixing it up with students to retain important mathematical concepts and skills. Okay, that's a great picture of Paul. I like that one, and so keep that in mind as we address this one. But what I'm going to do is we have a few minutes just to take some questions and kind of go from there. And so let's hold on. Where my mouse is gone. Okay, all right. Okay.
Yeah, everyone, go ahead and submit your questions through the Q&A feature, and I'll ask a few that have come in. One of my first questions, David, is what are some barriers to doing data collection in the way that you've described here? Is it primarily a knowledge issue, a resource issue, a time issue? Why do schools not do this?
Well, oh, that's John. That's a great question. And what I think about this one is the fact that it's first, there's no time built into the schedule. Data collection is often treated as something teachers should squeeze in between instruction, between crises, between toileting, between paraprofessional questions, things like this. The reality, if you don't protect time, you won't get data. So we need to make sure we build minutes into the schedule and this happen. The second thing that I'm seeing, and this is a tricky one, but vague or poorly written IEP goals. When
Mhm.
goals are written in, I would say, mushy or subjective language, where it's like will improve reading or will behave appropriately. Data can't be collected because nobody can define what success looks like. So what we have to think about this one is, I mean, the symptoms of this are no clear measurement criteria, staff collect inconsistent data, or we can't progress this one. But what it really gets to this is that there's a lack of staff training. Many educators have never been trained or taught how to use data efficiently, quickly, or consistently. Others were trained once years ago and expect to just know. So what the typical gaps are is how to take frequency versus duration versus latency, or how to measure academic beyond grades. Because we get a lot of data on grades, but it's often behavior issues we need to spend a lot more time on. And then the other thing, over compliant data sheets. It doesn't have to be complex. We can come up with really simple things about this one and address this one. But what it really gets to, the thing we're seeing is staff turnover. This is probably the biggest driver on this one, is that 1 in 4 principals nationwide change on an annual basis. We're replacing staff on a regular basis. Staff are not certified for what they're doing. And I don't mean to piss you off, but just to let you know that a staff member who's been working for 3 days is held to the same exact legal standard as someone who's been working for 20 years. So keep that in mind as we address this and pay attention to what we can do about this one. But the last perspective on this one is there's some people who believe it is just compliance stuff. Don't they feel that it's bureaucratic nonsense? What it actually does is it guides teaching, and we need to think about how we do this as a part of this one. Okay, that's a great question. Thanks for asking.
Next question, and you may have answered this a little bit already, is when do disputes arise in this area of extended school year determinations? What are the does it all come down to the data, or are there other uh, uh, procedural or substantial issues that arise that cause lawsuits?
So, I'm sorry. So, uh, let's summarize it real fast. When districts use the wrong standard or they make one up, they apply, for instance, like a grade retention standard, or they require the student to fail first, or they use the parent work schedule, or they say that ESY is, for instance, only offered with students with autism, or claim that ESY is only for regression recruitment when state policy allows broader criteria. Um, Parents, and I applaud parents for this, they know that ID allows multiple bases for ESY. regression, recoupment, critical skills, emergent skills, all those kinds of things. When you apply a very narrow or wrong standard, parents can rightly push back. But what is really tripping up districts is the teams don't have actual data. And that's why that's why we're having this session in December, is we want to make sure that districts are paying attention to the fact that they should be taking data now about how a student is performing, and then take the data the first week after the student comes back in January. You're not going to get a long stretch without the kids that you can have this to see whether the students regress during this one. So keep this in mind. Without the data, you cannot without data. They make things understand. Without data, you cannot legally deny ESY. Okay? Districts that rely on that we don't think he needs it, or teachers' gut feelings, lose the cases, or after the fact making determinations. So keep this in mind, because or the district I worked in with last year said that we don't have staff. We don't run ESY for preschool, or we don't offer PT or OT in the summer. We don't have transportation. We don't serve those kids, things like that. Districts cannot deny ESY because of cost. They cannot deny ESY because of staffing. They cannot deny ESY because of transportation or convenience. So keep that in mind as we address this one, and pay that. I hope that helps a little bit. I mean, I could go on for a while, but we just think about this one is the ESY determinations for all kids need to be individualized to the child, not to the disability. And that's what I emphasize. That's why I was harping on, and I applaud the Division for Learning Disabilities addressing this one, because too many districts are saying that students with learning disabilities are not ESY eligible. That is not the case. That we have to look at whether the student actually needs this and meets the criteria. Most students with learning disabilities probably do not need ESY, but you cannot uniformly make a blanket statement like that. Okay?
Yep. Last question is, if you were talking to a parent who hears about ESY and thinks, oh, this is free childcare in the summer, how would you talk to them to explain to them who is eligible for ESY? If you're maybe talking to a parent, not necessarily a teacher or school professional.
Um, Let me explain. Because we often in education use a lot of jargon, right? And so let's start. Make sure you start with what ESY is. ESY is the support we provide. For instance, to say it this way, let me get my words right. ESY is the support we provide during long breaks when a student is at risk of losing important skills that would not come back quickly when the school starts again. Right? I like that. All right. But make sure I emphasize this. Right? And explain to the parent, it's based on the individual need, just as I was articulating, not on the disability. But then talk about the standard for this, and emphasize that it's when they lose skills, if they regress, their critical skills are not being there, or interrupting services would provide problems. And emphasize that ESY decisions are based on data, but also emphasize that ESY is not a summer enrichment program. That it's not just to enrich the students or to help with one thing. It's to help make sure the student doesn't lose what has been previously taught to them. And so, but make sure for a parent, invite their input. Please value the input from the parents. All right. For instance, I would ask the parents very specifically, have you noticed skill loss during weekends, holidays, or past summers? Your observation will help make the team make the right decision. Ask the parent about this one, and ask the parent how they can help with what's going on. But make sure they talk about what ESY is versus what it's not. And so keep this in mind. But the important part is make sure that we talk with the parents and we have data, and that we look at the data together. We review the information together. We talk through what the data says together and decide as a team whether ESY is needed together, and emphasize it that way. Keep that in mind. All right. That's a wonderful question. I'm really glad whoever asked that one gets bonus points and can take the rest of the day off. Okay. All right.
Well, thank you for joining us, everyone. I think that that's all the questions we have and all the time we have for today. Do join us January 6th for Paul Riccomini's session on retaining math skills and concepts. Be watching your emails for the link to register for that, also our Facebook and Twitter pages. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Please let us know what we can do for you.